I am a creative. I make a living putting videos of myself on the internet. As far as creativity goes, I have what many people might call a dream job. But despite this, just the other day, I feel ashamed to admit that I had an emotional breakdown, and I feel obliged to share this story with you in this video. I'm realizing that the creative process isn't always as easy or as enjoyable as it probably seems from the outside. For almost the entirety of this past month, we've been in Canada, visiting Nisha's family in Vancouver, which is probably one of my favorite cities on earth, and it's something that we are really fortunate to be able to do. We'd been planning this trip for months amidst busy schedules and flight restrictions, and no doubt this trip came with a lot of inevitable expectations, which probably should have set off some alarm bells. In the months leading up to this trip, I'd been mounting increasing pressure on myself with my work by expecting to squeeze out the very best quality that I can muster for each and every video and project, whilst increasing the pace at which I do so. I was really motivated and excited, and creatively I wanted to execute video ideas that I truly believed in and felt excited about. I think many of us in creative industries can probably relate to this, as most creative projects, from buildings to building websites, prompt similar types of thinking. But on top of this pressure, becoming a father to our newborn daughter required from me a very different set of responsibilities and expectations. This is nothing new to a lot of people. As human beings, we have children, we do demanding work, and we spend time with our family members. But despite my best efforts after making this trip, things didn't go as smoothly as I'd once hoped. As we moved from spare bedroom to spare bedroom, we balanced outings with work schedules and overcame the inevitable difficulties that arose as plans changed and expectations collided. Without going into the specifics of all of these inevitable difficulties, a lack of sleep combined with high expectations and a festering creative block culminated into this overwhelming sense of impossibility, as I ended up tossing and turning, worrying about my work and my family, until I ended up breaking down, winding up, crying in a ball like a child at 1 a.m, consumed by this state of complete and utter helplessness. In hindsight, things weren't as bad as I'd made them out to be, and as someone who typically hides a lot of what they're feeling inside, this kind of manifestation of emotions was completely unfamiliar to me. It became clear that accepting failure in certain things was something that I was going to have to come to terms with. The following day, I decided to try and just forget about it all and go on a hike that I had planned with some members of our family. It's funny that my ingrained mentality towards productivity and work ethic told me that this was absolutely the wrong thing to do, as firstly, I'd already been on some hikes this trip, and secondly, I understood that problems with work are typically solved by action, not inaction, so it only made sense to me that putting things to one side and pretending like everything was okay would only cause these feelings of impossibility to resurface once I get back to facing the reality of my work. All of this seemed very logical, but while I was on this hike, I realized a couple of things. The act of putting one foot in front of another for an extended period isn't particularly stimulating or novel, especially when compared to things like watching a great movie, playing video games, or even using social media. These are all things that my instincts now tell me to do whenever I feel like I need a break, as 1, they're easy, and 2, I enjoy them, and they often feel strangely purposeful, even if it's only because of novelty or an illusion. Hikes, on the other hand, are not always easy, and walking isn't really something that's competitive or something that you can get really skilled at. You simply just do it for the sake of doing it. The thing that surprised me though is that somehow I felt better, even though it was quite tiring and it had very little purpose other than experiencing a nice view at the end of it. This counterproductive approach seemed to paradoxically be helping this sense of impossibility that I was feeling, so I decided to take things a little less seriously for the following days by confronting the fact that I'll probably fail even meeting this intentionally easy fortnightly upload schedule that I'd given to myself. So I just decided to allow myself to take a break by sitting alone without giving myself anything really to do or to work towards. So no activities, no social media, no video games, no deadlines, no appointments, no expectations, just permission to let my curiosity take over and see what happens. I had become so lost and overwhelmed with this career path of making videos online that I had even been considering going back into the architectural workforce and just leaving all of it behind. So I decided to just sit alone with my thoughts and notes from the previous weeks, as well as reviewing some of the things that I'd been reading to try and get an idea of what it is that I really needed to do. But suddenly, I began to have a breakthrough and all of the dots started to connect for the direction that I needed to go in with my creativity. Without sounding overly dramatic, it's almost as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. Without this pressure of expectation or the desire to work at speed, the brain fog seemed to subside and things became clear for the first time in months as I began to feel like I had some direction around where I should be taking things. Perhaps there were other things at play here, but the creative breakthrough that I somehow couldn't get from working paradoxically came from inactivity, despite how much I'd tried in previous months to put more and more expectations on myself. I'm not sure about the science behind all of this, but I began to realize that my ability to be creative is inextricably linked to how mentally stimulated I am, more so how little mental stimulation I have, along with how slow the pace of my day goes. For the past several weeks, I realized that I hadn't really taken a break from my work, even though I'd told myself that I had, as the nature of YouTube is just pressure to meet deadline after deadline, especially when you bring sponsorships into the mix. But amidst this solitude and boredom, somehow I finally felt rested, and the creativity came from the very opposite direction that I was so desperately striving towards. It began to dawn on me that as human beings, we don't actually like resting. In the Torah and the Bible, there's the Sabbath, which was something that was enforced as a day of rest that commemorated God's rest on the seventh day of creation. And it's somewhat striking that this was something that was commanded rather than merely requested or suggested. In our increasingly atheistic society, it's probably no coincidence that there's less of this culture around rest, as many people strive for consumption and excess, with nobody liking to follow rules and restrictions, especially when they're as unpleasant as having to do nothing. And with the advent of technology, unsurprisingly, what we now deem as rest does very little to bring us into this state of inactivity. This fear of boredom is backed up by a rather shocking survey that showed that almost 1/3 of Americans would rather give up sex for 3 months than go without their smartphone for just 1 week, and 40% would rather give up their dog than go without a smartphone. All these negative effects of our devices has been covered countless times already, but it's crazy to think that we can essentially swipe away our boredom with the dopamine that our smartphones provide us. If you ask yourself, when was the last time that you were really bored, like really out of your mind bored? It's probably quite hard to remember, and even if you do, it was likely because you were stuck somewhere like an airport for an extended period without Wi-Fi or a charger. The idea of the dopamine detox has been around a long time, and I can't say that I'm hardcore enough to have fully leaned into this kind of intense Silicon Valley practice, but I've come to realize that when I'm bored, it allows my mind to wander, something that doesn't really happen as regularly as I'd like it to. It's no coincidence that many people admit that they have their best ideas whilst in the shower or while lying in bed after a long day, as these times essentially create forced boredom as you're entirely unplugged from your devices. Perhaps this is also why there's benefits to being alone, because when you're bored, the mental chains of activity are lifted and it allows your mind to wander, which in essence is the playground of our creative minds. It's likely why the Turner Prize winning sculptor Anish Kapoor said, It's precisely in those moments when I don't know what to do, boredom drives one to try a host of possibilities to either get somewhere or not get anywhere. And it's possibly why the singer Kate Nash said in a recent Rolling Stone interview that in hindsight, boredom had a huge part to play in her creative process, where she described that she enjoyed letting the great motivator that is boredom take over until a small itch starts to tickle and requires a good scratch. Likewise, with my own creativity, I began to realize that even though I try to be intentional about most of what I do, I may have ignored the fact that I need to be more intentional about rest, specifically scheduling in times of inactivity, and even more specifically, scheduling in times of boredom by participating in things that force me to slow down, like solitude, walking, time alone, yoga, meditation, and reading. This video was a bit more personal than some of my other ones, so I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'd like to hear from you down in the comments if you've also experienced anything similar when it comes to feeling overwhelmed when encountering a problem or a creative block. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.